What if a carton of eggs costs $5 in Singapore today, but becomes $7 tomorrow and $10 next week? And every time you go on holiday, your Singapore dollar gets you less bang for your buck. What if Singapore didn't have the space to build some of its iconic landmarks? Well, there's a reason these scenarios aren't reality.
Our reserves.
From the reserves.
Reserves.
Most of us probably think of our reserves as an emergency piggy bank that only comes in handy when there's a national crisis. But it's actually used in more ways than you think. First, the $1 million, or should we say billion, or $1 trillion question. Just how much does Singapore have in its reserves?
We don't actually know because the actual figure is not published.
I think the number of people who know the full value is quite limited.
But we managed to grab hold of one of them.
I'm sure you are dying to ask that question.
Well, I can't tell because we look at our reserves as part of our national security, not unlike our critical military capabilities. And we don't go around telling the world what our military capabilities are. Why should we?
But based off components of the reserves that are published, some have estimated the total amount to be over $1 trillion. Can't fathom how much $1 trillion is? If you spent $1 million a day, it would take almost 3,000 years to get through it all. So, why does it matter that a city-state has such huge reserves? Well, because it's used for some pretty important things. Like curbing inflation.
10 years ago, this $50 note could buy all this with some change to spare. But today, this would set you back about $10 more. This is an example of inflation, the rise in the price of goods and services over time. When an economy is doing well, people tend to spend more. And when firms see the increased demand, they will increase prices to maximize profits. So inflation could rise as a result of very strong demand, but it could also rise because of rise in production costs or shortage of supply, especially of imports.
Central banks are responsible for keeping rising prices in check. And most do this by adjusting the interest rates. When interest rates are raised, borrowing money becomes more expensive. People tend to spend less, and businesses will lower their prices because of decreased demand. Unlike most other central banks, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, or MAS, manages the exchange rate instead. That's because Singapore is an open economy that's heavily dependent on trade, so the exchange rates have a bigger impact on prices than interest rates. For example, Singapore imports 90% of its food, like these nuts from Malaysia, and most of the fresh produce. Even the electricity used to power this freezer is generated from imported gas.
This packet of vegetables is from Malaysia. So if the Malaysian exporter wanted to charge 3 Malaysian ringgit for it, and if our exchange rate were 3 ringgit to $1, it would cost the Singapore importer $1. But should Singapore's exchange rate weaken to 2 ringgit to the dollar, it would cost 150 instead.
Of course, the final price you pay includes other costs and markups. But a favorable exchange rate acts as a dampener on huge price increases.
If there's a global shortage of the vegetables and the prices skyrocket, for example, then having a stronger exchange rate could help to moderate the price increase for Singaporeans. So without any adjustment of the exchange rate, we could see even higher inflation in Singapore as a result of imported inflation.
You might be wondering how we control the exchange rate and what all this has got to do with Singapore's reserves. Well, Sin Yi has the answers. But just a minute. She's a little sleep deprived. She works in this very restricted part of Singapore's central bank that only a selected group of people have access to.
We need Face ID, fingerprint to be able to enter the dealing room because what we do is highly classified and involves large sums of money.
It may look like an ordinary office, but this room is where up to billions of dollars are traded every day.
When we are on duty, the job is 24 hours. Our job, in essence, is to defend the Sing dollar.
But wait, before we get into why Xingyi has to work around the clock, here's a little background. MAS is one of 3 caretakers of Singapore's reserves. As the central bank, it manages the official foreign reserves, which includes cash in foreign currencies, bonds and shares in companies, and commodities like gold. Like other major currencies, the Singapore dollar is traded on the foreign exchange market. MAS has its own traders like Xingyi, whose job it is to keep the Sing dollar exchange rate right where it wants it, or at least close to it. Think of it as a game of darts, except instead of just targeting the bullseye, MAS's aim is to keep the exchange rate within an optimal range between the Sing dollar and an undisclosed basket of currencies of Singapore's major trading partners. This exchange rate is called the Singapore Dollar Nominal Effective Exchange Rate, or SingNER for short. The SingNER is allowed to appreciate or depreciate against this basket as long as it's within a secret safe zone or policy band, known only to MAS. This prevents huge fluctuations in the exchange rate with our trading partners. If the SingNER is in danger of falling outside that safe zone, well, that's when Xingyi has to jump into action.
I'm part of a team of MAS officers who monitor the Sing dollar exchange rate. We intervene in the market to ensure that the SingNER stays within the policy band and there's not too much volatility in the Sing dollar exchange rate. In doing so, we accumulate or draw down on foreign reserves.
Okay, we can't actually show her in action since the information on her computer screens is classified. So instead, Xingyi is offered to show us using a video game MAS created. It's located right next to the main lobby.
So this is a simplified version of how I intervene in the foreign exchange market. So when the SingNER is approaching the top of the policy band, it will mean that the Sing dollar is too strong.
That would make Singapore's exports more expensive and therefore less competitive.
We will be intervening by selling the Sing dollar. And in doing so, we will be increasing the amount of official foreign reserves that we hold. And if it's approaching or exceeding the bottom of the band, it will mean that the Sing dollar is too weak. We will buy the Sing dollar back from the market using the official foreign reserves. In doing so, it will strengthen the Sing dollar.
This keeps the cost of imported goods from getting too expensive.
When key market events happen, US Sing dollar exchange rate will be very volatile. Say, for example, the Federal Reserve is announcing their rate decision. It happens at 2-3 a.m. in our Singapore time, and we will have to be awake if needed to intervene in the market.
And there are other more sinister threats she has to be alert to. Speculative attacks on the Sing dollar, which is
when speculators want to drive down the currency, so they will be selling high and buying low subsequently when the currency really falls to the levels that they are looking at, profiting off this sell high, buy low difference.
In essence, speculators could drive down the value of the Singapore dollar by aggressively selling it in the currency markets.
So our role is to use the official foreign reserves to buy back the Sing dollar from the market because this would support and appreciate the Sing dollar again. If we do not have sufficient official foreign reserves, we are unable to defend the Sing dollar against speculative attacks.
It's not just the cost of living that the reserves contribute to, but the size of the land that we live on. When Singapore gained independence in 1965, it looked something like this. But over the years, it has added pieces. Quite important ones, I might add. Marina Bay, Changi Airport, East Coast Park. All these places wouldn't exist if Singapore hadn't reclaimed land. Since it gained independence, the country has grown by about a quarter in size. And the first piece began here, with the original East Coast Plan.
Everything on the left of us used to be sea. This is all reclaimed land.
This bungalow, sandwiched between condominiums and shopping malls, used to sit right on the beach. And across the road where the sea once was,
Victoria Junior College, that's where I went to school. So this is Marine Terrace. So that's where I used to stay. So it was really very close to VJC. It was just a walking distance away. There's lots of fond memories growing up here because my formative years were all in Marine Parade. So whether it's the Marine Parade Library down the road, the hawker center and the neighborhood center nearby, going to Parkway Parade later on when it came up, these were things that I grew up with. Marine Parade is Singapore's first public housing estate built on reclaimed land, so it was something quite special at that time. My parents would tell me that people were very concerned in those days that this land would sink, and they weren't very sure whether to buy Marine Parade flats. But they all lived in the east at that time, my mother in particular, her side of the family. So when she and my dad got married, the flats here were available and it made sense for them to get flats here.
the East Coast Reclamation was Singapore's first major post-independence reclamation project, adding 1,525 hectares to Singapore's southeastern coast and reshaping the city skyline. This new land created space for East Coast Park, an expressway connecting the east to the city, and the landmarks at Marina Bay that have become icons of Singapore. And in the near future, reclaimed land is set to take Singapore's ambitions as an aviation hub to new heights.
This is where we will be building the new Changi Airport Terminal 5. As you can see, it's a huge piece of land. So T5 will be bigger than all the terminals in Changi Airport today. Today, we see throughput at Changi Airport coming back to pre-COVID levels, and we expect demand to increase considerably over the coming years. And that's why we are now building new capacity through Terminal 5 to make sure that we can continue to secure Singapore's position as a global aviation hub.
The costs of reclaiming land at East Coast and here at Changi East were covered by Singapore's operating budget, which would include funds collected from taxes. But since 2001, land reclamation has been paid for using the country's past reserves. And that's how Singapore's biggest ongoing reclamation project on the other end of the island at Tuas is funded. On this land, Singapore is building the world's largest fully automated port, further boosting Singapore's position as a global shipping hub.
The use of past reserves is very helpful because land reclamation projects are costly and we can only see the benefits over the long term. Without the use of past reserves for land reclamation, we would likely end up borrowing or using our own current resources. That would certainly be a bit of a constraint. But we should not get the mistaken idea that this is a draw on reserves, because when we use past reserves to create new land, the land is also protected as past reserves. And when we create the land and eventually sell the land for development, those land proceeds goes back to the reserves again. So from that point of view, it's really just a conversion of assets from finance to land and then back to finance.
That's why using past reserves to pay for land reclamation doesn't require approval from the President. Big projects aside, the reserves also help Singaporeans in rather personal ways, like helping them grow their savings for retirement and other needs in their Central Provident Fund or CPF accounts.
The guaranteed interest rates for the CPF are a key part of our CPF system, and it's a system that works only because of our reserves.
So the CPF interest rates of the various accounts are pegged to market interest rates. And the government also has a floor interest rate. This means that the government absorbs the investment risk of the investment of the CPF monies.
The CPF money that you and your employer contribute every month is actually invested in something called Special Singapore Government Securities Bonds. Think of it as an IOU for your CPF money, with not just a money-back guarantee, but added interest. Imagine this coin is the money loaned. The money gets deposited into Singapore's central bank and mixed in with other government funds. The bulk of this larger pool of money then gets passed to the country's sovereign wealth fund, the GIC, to invest. The returns on these investments add to Singapore's reserves, which ensure the government can pay the guaranteed interest in years when investment returns aren't as good.
If we were to move to a different system, let the CPF member take their own risk. You have people who retire, let's say, during the global financial crisis. It will be terrible for their retirement, or anyone who has retired in the last 3 years when markets were impacted and had such great volatility. They would have been impacted too. So regardless of the ups and downs in the markets, we continue to pay the same guaranteed interest rate to CPF members. Sometimes we think that the reserves are there only for future emergency, but in fact, the reserves are also an endowment providing for today's needs, and all of us are benefiting from it right now.
What he's talking about is the NIRC, Net Investment Returns Contribution. Every year, half of the projected returns on the investment of our reserves flows directly into public spending. So some of the $22.4 billion from last financial year's NIRC went toward paying for sheltered walkways like these, polyclinics like this one, and the subsidies for its patients, and even the greenery we enjoy.
We run a structural deficit in our primary fiscal balance of about 3+% of GDP. That gap is covered by the NIRC. It's something that is very important.
We dug up the budget statements from the last decade. They reveal that the Singapore government spent more than it raised in revenue for the last 10 years. And in 8 of those 10 years, the top-up from the NIRC rescued it from being in the red.
If we didn't have the NIRC, then we have to cut back almost 3% of GDP, of spending. That's a lot. It will mean less public housing for Singaporeans. It will mean less infrastructure, our trains, our buses. We'll have to cut back on services. This is tightening of the belt to an extent that no one has ever felt before.
Government spending has increased quite significantly, and most of this increase has been due to increase in social expenditure. Over the last 10 years, social spending has grown at about 8% a year. NIRC has become so important that it is unimaginable for the annual budgets to be balanced without it.
When the NIRC was introduced in 2009, it made up less than 15% of total government revenue. Since then, it's grown to become one of the largest contributors to government coffers, accounting for about 20% of spending money in 2022. The other half of the investment returns, not used for public spending, goes back into the reserves.
The portion that goes back to the reserves is important because if we don't have anything going back into the reserves, the value of the reserves will diminish over time. Some people think that, just take more from the NIRC, what harm does it do? And the other misconception is we already have so much. So what's the harm? Our reserves, let's say it earns a return in real terms of about 4%. If we take half, it means 2% goes into the budget, 2% goes back into the reserves. Our economy is growing at about 2% every year. So if our reserves is growing at about 2% and the economy is growing at about 2%, it means that our reserves is keeping pace barely with our economy. So it's not as though we are over-saving.
This growing pot of savings also comes in handy during times of crises. Does this room look familiar? Well, we've set it up to look just like it did over the last 3 years, when Singapore's ministers gave regular updates on the COVID-19 outbreak.
This is a lot of familiarity with this environment, and I see you have recreated it to be almost like what we
had during the press conferences. I had to come here repeatedly. In 2020, when COVID started, we were still not quite sure how severe it was going to be. Then in March, we knew it was going to get quite bad and we needed additional measures. And by then, we had no more fiscal resources.
The government has obtained President's in-principle support to draw up to $17 billion to fund some of the measures to save jobs and the economy.
We needed to go to the President for reserves. This was not just one time, because after that, we continued to have 4 budgets in the year alone. The only alternative would have been to borrow, which is what most other countries do. When you borrow, you have great uncertainty, and therefore I think it would have impacted the swiftness and the decisiveness of our response. We were the first in Asia to get the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, and the reserves played a critical role in enabling us to do so. I have no doubt that without the reserves, we would have ended up with more lives lost in COVID, and certainly we would have ended up with a much higher unemployment. We appreciate that we have a rainy day fund. It's very unique, and very few other countries in the world have what we have. And I'm sure if we were to be faced with any future shock, an emergency, a calamity, a disaster that may even be bigger than what we have been through in the last 3 years of COVID, we can count on our reserves to tackle the shocks, to rebuild Singapore if need be, and to make sure that we keep moving forward.